Hi, I'm Hayley Victoria and welcome back to my crime and policing channel. As you can see, I'm feeling pretty festive, so if you're watching rather than listening, you can obviously see my red and green beautiful clothing and the Christmas tree and stuff in the back. If you're just listening, take it from me, I look very festive today, almost bordering on a bit Whoville, but you know, 'tis the season and all that. Today's session, I'm going to be looking at more Christmas crimes and Christmas investigations, focusing specifically on the evidence used to capture suspects and to bring that justice to the crimes that have been committed. So in today's case, we are looking at the murder of Joanna Yeats, as she was murdered December the 17th in 2010. Now this story does jar with me a little bit, well, more than some of the others, because she was my age when she passed away. So we were born in the same year, and you know, just think of the life that she could have had, which was tragically cut short at the age of 25. So she was a landscape architect, super intelligent, you know, she got her life sorted out, she got a fantastic job in Bristol, she got a steady relationship, a lovely flat in Clifton, she got her life sorted out, you know, she was doing really, really well, very successful, she was doing a cracking job, she was winning at life. And then tragically, December 17th, that was all cut short very quickly. And, you know, it was nothing that she had done that had brought that on. So a very tragic case. So let's go back to 2010. So it's not too far away, considering the cases I talk about. 2010 is quite recent, isn't it? So yeah, December 17th, Joanna and her friends from work had been to the pub, as you do after work, right? It was Friday night. They went to the pub after work to the Ram in Bristol. She had a couple of drinks, by no means was she hammered, had a couple of drinks with friends, then set off home. On the way home, she went to Tesco, bought a pizza, which was tomato, mozzarella and basil, and a couple of bottles of cider from the nearby Bargain Booze, and went home. So about 8:45, she got home. So just before that, she'd phoned some of her friends. She'd arranged a Christmas Eve gathering with one of them, her best friend, on the phone, and then that was the last that they heard of her. Now then, about 8:45, 8:50, neighbours reported hearing two screams and then silence, and that was it. And it wasn't until 2 days later that they actually realised that Joanna was missing. And that's when her boyfriend, Gregory Eden, got back from Sheffield, being on a night out in Sheff with his friends. He came home to Bristol, to the flat he shared with Joanna. He'd not been getting hold of her all weekend, and he's like, this is not like her, you know. She'd actually said to her friends she didn't want to be alone over that weekend because she missed him, you know, they've got a really good relationship. And she didn't want to spend the weekend without him, understandably. And so he came back and she wasn't there, and he's like, okay, this is weird. Tried calling her again, he'd been trying to call her and text her, but no reply. And when he called her, the phone rang within the apartment. She wasn't there. So he found where the phone was, which was in a coat pocket, which was hung up. Her keys were there, her purse was there. He was worried, right? He doesn't know where she is. And that was like at 8:30 at night or something. It got to quarter to 1 in the morning, so after 12, and he's like, you know what, it's not sitting right with me, something is wrong. And he phoned the police and reported her missing. And they acted quite quickly initially, so they turned up quite quickly to discover what had happened. Her boyfriend was cleared of being involved in the investigation at all after they did their initial preliminary inquiries and stuff, and he was treated as a witness. So yeah, he had nothing to do with her going missing or anything that happened to her. So I don't want people thinking it's that kind of story, because it's not. Yeah, so now they've got a missing person. They went to the flats within their a kind of apartment complex. So they live in a big house in Bristol, which had been divided into a couple of flats, like 3 flats. One of them belonging to Joanna and her boyfriend Greg, the other to Vincent Tabak and his partner. He was like an architectural engineer, and one to the landlord, Chris Jeffries. So they went to those apartments to ask some questions, do a little bit of digging, but didn't really come up with anything. This launched like a major investigation across newspapers, and the family put a big, like, you know, reward on there for any information about their missing daughter. You know, she's missing, we need to get her back for Christmas, where is my daughter? Totally uncharacteristic. She's not the kind of person who just goes missing and doesn't come back. In their apartment as well, they did find the bottles of cider. One was partially drunk, and they didn't actually find any sign of the pizza, which is weird. So yeah, this is where we are so far. Massive nationwide hunt for her. They go and look in Vincent Tabak's house, they question Jeffries, And then it's not until Christmas Day that Joanna is found. She's found dead at the side of a road in Flayland. I think that's how I pronounce it, apologies if you don't, which is about 3 miles away from where they live, so it's a big distance from where she was. Fayland, I think it's called. I keep saying the thing, I hope it's right. Anyway, so they find her and she's dead at the side of the road, and they don't understand at the moment how she has died. So if she's died of the cold, she's got hypothermia and passed away there, or what has happened. But the pathology reports that was conducted after they'd found her prove that she'd died from strangulation. She'd also got another 43 injuries on her body, including a fractured nose. So they immediately launched a murder inquiry. This is not someone who's fallen over after a couple of shandies and frozen to death. This is not what happened. So now we're dealing with a murder, and that's when the investigation starts gathering more pace. When you've got a serious crime like a murder, you have to get it solved. Obviously, you need to get the person who's responsible for that crime off the streets and get justice for those victims and their families. You have to. It's really important. And obviously murder is a common law offence, as we know. So the investigation continues, and they do all the usual things. So they take any samples and stuff from Joanna, from her body, and they take swabs, they look for fibres and hairs, things like that. Standard things you do when you are investigating a crime. Then they start questioning people, and Chris Jeffries, the landlord, comes into question. And at this point, Vincent de Back, the other person who lives in the complex, has gone to Amsterdam, to Netherlands, to see his family with his partner. And he sees on the news that Chris Jeffries, the landlord, is currently under investigation, has been arrested and is being interviewed. Now then, he thinks, ooh, and he phones the police and tells them, oh, Chris Jeffries borrowed my car on the night. He was using my car the night that she disappeared. I hope that's not got anything to do with it. So he gets a call from a DC, a detective constable, who arranges to go out to Schiphol Airport to interview him. And then he starts to get a bit fishy. So Vincent de Back was 25 at the time also. And he was like way too interested in the forensic investigation. Ding, 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 ding. They always go back to the scene. Well, not always, but a lot of the time they go back to the scene to see how they're getting on, if they're going to get caught. This is what he did. And this is where he dropped a real clanger. Because when he was originally talked to by the police, when they were doing their preliminary investigations, it was kind of getting away with stuff. But then he started changing his story. So when he was talking to this detective, giving information about Jeffries, the landlord, he was actually making himself look super suspicious. And he was like, oh yeah, borrowed my car, and I went out twice, actually, not just once. I told you once before, I went out twice. The first time I went out to take pictures of the snow. The second time, what did I do? I went to Asda. It started to sound a bit weird. And then they were like, clearly they thought this guy was something not right. And, shortly after, Chris Jeffries, the landlord, had been cleared of any wrongdoing too. There was nothing connecting him to the crime, pointing the target clearly at Vincent de Back. So when they start investigating him, they find that he's been looking at like loads of extreme violent porn on the internet. It's particularly degrading against women. And also they found some child pornography on there as well. They arrested him and spoke to him, and originally he's like pleading his innocence. He's like, no, I didn't do it, no way, no way. But he did confess to a chaplain in prison chaplain, that he had done it. He was going to plead not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. And they looked at all this stuff, which was like the evidence on the computers and stuff, the digital evidence he'd been looking at. And they started doing more investigations into that. So I've mentioned like the violent extreme porn. And on that pornography, there was one particular video where a female involved looked quite similar to the victim, down to the colour of the top she was wearing. They found that he liked watching things where women were being degraded, like I mentioned, a lot of force by men. He'd been looking at sex workers and escorts in his area. He got a keen interest in this kind of control over women, particularly in relation to sex. And they were like, oh dear, this is not looking good. It's worth mentioning, by the way, when they did find Joanna, her trousers had not been tampered with. There was no evidence there that she had been sexually assaulted that way. They did, however, find, well, they take swabs of her chest because she was exposed on one side from her top when they found her. And they did take some samples from Vincent Tabak. In fact, they took those before they arrested him. And the DC at the time said she wanted to take them to just eliminate him from their inquiries in case they found him, evidence of him inside the flat. And he also mentioned in that interview that, oh, he might have been in the hallway of their flat at one point. Why would you be in there, right? So obviously it was sus. They arrested him, blah, 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 took all his samples, and then they looked at the forensic evidence at the scene. So let's discuss that. So the forensic evidence they found, they did swabs of Tabak which matched DNA evidence on Joanna's body. Now they couldn't say whether that was from saliva, semen or otherwise, because there wasn't that much of it, but they managed to like amplify it using those DNA enhancement techniques and prove a positive match. And there was like less than 30 billion chance or something. It could have been anybody other than him. They also found fibres and hairs that matched Vincent Tabak's clothes and his car fibres to the ones that were on Joanna's jeans and her clothing. So what he had actually done is he'd put her in the trunk of his car for a while before disposing of her body 3 miles away. And obviously you know about cross-transference of materials, every contact leaves a trace. So you've got a primary transfer there from the suspect to the victim, which is then being revealed in investigation. That's a lot of good evidence. So we've got forensics, you've got your DNA, you've got, which was swabbed from the body and from the suspect. You've got fibres and hairs, which are transferred from clothing to clothing and from car to clothing. We've also then got confession evidence. So he did actually confess to the chaplain that he'd done it, but he didn't say he'd done it like as a premeditated thing. What he'd said was that she was flirting with him, she invited him into a flat, like, hey, you want to come for a little nightcap? She didn't, by the way. You know, she was happily involved with somebody else. He said she was flirty, invited him in, and then when he tried to kiss her, because he thought, you know, she was giving him the signs, she screamed and he panicked and put his hand over her mouth and her neck to stop her from screaming. And then within 20 seconds, she slumped and she died. It's a big accident. He panicked and then he didn't know what to do. So he put her in the boot of his car and then, you know, disposed of her later on. That's what his story was. But it's worth mentioning that the hallway in the flat where Joanna lived was like, there'd been some disturbance in there as well, which doesn't add up with somebody inviting you in for a drink, does it? No, Vincent, it does not. Luckily, the court thought that too. And, you know, he was sentenced to life in prison, which is some justice for Joanna's family. But obviously, you can never replace a member of the family. Awful, awful tragedy was found to have happened around Christmas time. So, as I mentioned before, we're not looking at this to glorify crime. We're looking at it as an investigative evaluation. And we're looking at how forensic science, so we're looking at DNA, remember? Fibres and hairs. And then we're looking at other evidence as well. So you've got the stuff they've been looking at on the internet, looking at the motives. He likes that gratification of being in charge of women, that control, that sexualized predatory thing. They found that, didn't they? And also he confessed to the chaplain. All that evidence has helped secure the conviction of Vincent Tabak and bring justice for Joanna's family. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great holiday, whether you celebrate Christmas or whatever else you celebrate. Happy Hanukkah, happy holidays. Have a brilliant holiday. Stay safe, look after each other, please. If you're going out around town, drinking with your friends, just make sure you share cabs. Stay at each other's houses. Don't let anybody ever walk home alone. Even if you've had a few beers, especially if you've had a few, just look after each other and stay safe. Don't commit any crimes, and I'll see you soon. Bye.